In the last episode, we read stories about people with a spiritual gift, as described by their friends and family's point of view. In this episode, we take a look at a couple more accounts about the people with a paranormal sensitivity, but as told by themselves. While friends' accounts focuses inevitably more amusing and curious side, the first-person accounts of the people with a third eye are more serious and detailed. It seems unfortunately a double whammy. On one hand, they have to cope with all the paranormal experiences. Apparently having the gift doesn't seem to make encountering ghosts anyway easier or more pleasant. On the other hand, they also have to learn to live in the society where the majority could not and would not understand what they experience. We are going to look at the account of two such persons today. Each consisted with several anecdotes from their years of experience. The first one is not complete, but it especially gives a candid account of the original poster's social and internal struggle. Two first-hand accounts from Korea about to live with the paranormal gift. As always, handpicked, translated and narrated by your host, Anthony. My parents married shortly after their high school graduation, because my mother was pregnant with me. Having started a family at such early age, they had to rely on their family's support. We lived at my grandparents' home till I was 5. It was a large household that included my great-grandmother, grandparents, aunt, and uncles, but as soon as the great-grandmother passed, the family was shattered. My grandparents, who never got along but enjoyed living together for the sake of great-grandmother, separated. My parents stayed in town to work, and I was left with grandmother, who moved to a smaller village. So I lived alone with grandma for 3 years till I turned 8. And during this period, I started to see things. To my innocent eyes, they looked like clouds or fog floating in the air. And then I would nonchalantly tell Grandma that she should not work on the vegetable patch today, or we should lock our door tight tonight, or lightning should strike today, and so on. I actually don't remember that I did, but my grandma confirmed that my predictions were largely accurate. On the day I said we should lock the door tight, a robber broke into a neighbor's. And for the day I talked about lightning, a big tree at the village entrance was hit by a lightning and fell. If I sum up the stages I've gone through in regard of my sixth sense, it would be from being innocently carefree to, I must be wrong, to, I'm just different. When I was young, I didn't have any concept about sixth sense or third eye. I just sensed what I sensed and talked about them to Grandma. I didn't attend a kindergarten as the village was anyway too small for such an infrastructure, and having no other people to compare myself to, I didn't even realize I was different from others. My grandma was a shaman, and I spent lots of time in a shrine room, which I called Grandpa Room. Grandma served the deity of a general, and to my eyes he looked a grandpa. I had absolutely no fear and carefreely played in the room while my grandma prayed to her god. In such an environment, I did not feel I was at odds. The first shock came when I entered primary school. Grandma's place was the domain of her powerful general gods, and there were very few unholy energies. But at the school, with hundreds of people all around, I sensed all sorts of weird energies, some cold, some hot, some plain unpleasant. At first I simply understood it like characteristic smell of each individual, until I started noticing other kids seemed not feeling what I felt. My class partner, with whom I shared the desk, was particularly cold. Not that he had a cold character, but I sensed icy cold energy about him. One day at the math class, I noticed he was shaking. I looked at his face and found it turned white and his lips blue. Already cold, the usual energy about him became now as chilling as a Siberian winter. And I saw a man looking down on him. His enormous eyes, almost all white with very small pupil, had something malicious and chilling. When those terrifying eyes turned to look at me, I jumped up with a scream. Teacher was of course alarmed by it, and only then found my mate was in a terrible state. He was quickly carried to the school nurse. I and other classmates left behind were talking about what had just happened, but nobody was talking about the guy with enormous white eyes. He was so terrifying it wouldn't have been possible not noticing him. I even commented out loud, "The big-eyed man seemed to dislike the boy." But kids didn't understand what I meant and ignored it. Grandma never treated my unusual sense and comments weirdly and listened to them just like any other stories I had to tell. But now nobody was understanding what I said. Even my parents started to scold me that I shouldn't be saying such things carelessly. That was the beginning of the period I felt I was somewhat wrong. Back when I was 12, I often visited this friend's home. It was on the 3rd floor of a 16-storied old apartment block. After spending time with a friend into the evening, I was just on my way out of the door to go back home. I suddenly sensed a surge of heavy, sharp energy. It's difficult to put into words, but it felt like falling into a heavy fog in the dark of the night, yet some sense of something ripping up on top of that. I paused in the middle, still holding the doorknob. Something fell. A person. I didn't see what it was when it fell in front of my eyes. Just something fell swishing down. And only when I sensed a heavy energy following down right after did I realize it was a person. The jumper fell on the protruding section of the handrail on the ground floor, which fatally damaged him. It was the early evening time when kids were still playing in the playground or students on their way home, and the scene was witnessed by many of them. My friend was waving goodbye at the hall right behind me and wanted to see for herself what all the commotion was about. I pulled her back in the flat and closed the door behind me. I peeped the situation on the ground through the window, which I still regret. The man's body was cut in half. I sensed cold and chilling energy that quickly got oppressive, and I felt nauseous. My friend kept insisting to look what happened for herself, and I had to shout some swear words at her to stop. I heard the suicider was a single father of 3 kids, and getting fired from work might have triggered him. I don't know how much of it was true, but they found his suicide note. Some time passed, and on another visit to the friends, I saw the man's spirit, that heavy dark energy that fell following the man's body. Usually ghosts look the way they died, and I won't describe further how he looked. I stopped visiting the friends a while afterwards. When I was 13, my mother had an affair and ran away from home. About a year prior to that, I had a dream. I was sitting on the back seat of a strange black car while Mom was at the passenger seat. I could not see who was sitting at the driver's, but just assumed it should be Dad. I chatted with Mother, and only then, through the reflection on the rear view mirror, found out that the driver wasn't Dad. The man had jet black curled up hair. When he turned to look at me, his hair started melting down, revealing the scalp underneath. Mom then picked up those fallen locks of hair and wound them around her own neck as if they were a thick black scarf. I shouted that she'd choke herself that way, but Mom just smiled at me. Then she opened the door of the car and jumped out while the car was still running. A few months later, my mom took me in a black car. As soon as I set myself on the back seat, I remembered the earlier dream. I quickly glanced at the rearview mirror to be met by the eyes of the guy in the driver's seat. Mom introduced him as a work colleague, but I sensed something more. Their auras were tangled up, almost stuck together. Only a few days later, my parents had a big fight. Dad found out about Mom's affair and beat her up, and Mom ran away. Her lover was the guy I saw in the car. Mother was back home about a month later. Apparently, Dad hired a private detective to find her. Before her return, I had another dream. Someone knocked on the door. I asked who it was, but nobody answered. Another knock. "Who is it?" Silence. Yet another knock. "Mom?" Silence. I burst open the door to find Mom there, with her hair cut short and her arms tied up. I reached out to untie her, but she stepped back. I pleaded her to come in so that I could untie her, but she kept dodging me. In the end, she turned around and went away again. Mom ran away again after only 2 weeks. We lost contact with her, and after a mud fight, my parents divorced. I haven't had any dreams about Mom since then, and I assume my connection to her might be already broken. I was bullied in the middle school. It started off with mates ignoring me, then despising me, and finally escalated to active bullying. I wasn't anyway outstanding student and usually kept myself to myself. But one day mentioned to a classmate that she should double-check the door that night. And apparently a robber broke into her home that night. Nobody was hurt apart from some loss of valuables, but obviously she got scared and curious about me. I expected it would all blow over and die down, but apparently not. One day some girl came up to me and asked with a smirk, "So, when are you gonna die? You should know that too, right?" I was still young and indiscreet, and I told her, "Do call your grandma today before it's too late." She called me a BS and went away. She didn't come to school the next day because her grandmother passed away the previous night. People started talking behind my back that I was creepy. My reason was telling me I should keep my mouth shut, but the strange pride of a teenage girl wouldn't let me. So to a girl who spreaded a rumor about me, I said that it was nasty that she talked down her late grandpa whose spirit was still looking after her. And to another girl who raided my locker and threw my things in the bin, I said that she had creepy energy and shouldn't hate her late stepmother. So, the ignoring quickly turned to despise, and those so far just ignored me started actively joining in, talking down on me. And then I had an accident. I was on my way home from school. I was standing on the edge of the pedestrian pavement waiting for the traffic light to change. I saw a white car running towards, followed by a motorbike. I was struck by a foreboding and then saw the driver of the white car shaking. Not the person was shaking, but his energy was flickering. I knew something was about to happen. I stepped back and kept watching when the bike crashed into the car, which suddenly stopped at the crossroad. Both the bike and its riders flew about in the air. Then another car, in an attempt to avoid crushing into them, ran over the pedestrian pavement. I avoided a direct hit as I had stepped back, but the car ran over my leg when I fell on the ground. I cried with enormous pain, but was still seized by the chilling sensation emitting from the crushed motorbike. I could sense one of the riders was dead, from his energy turning cold and heavy. The driver of the car that broke my leg got out and was running around like a headless chicken, but I only shouted that a person was dead there, as the sensation of death was more pressing than the pain from my broken leg. Fortunately, my injury wasn't too severe, and could return to school with my broken leg in the cast. The attitude of the colleagues around me had turned downright hostile upon my return. Another student witnessed the accident and apparently appalled by me crying death over my broken leg. The rumor circulated quickly, and I ended up finding my missing bag tossed in the toilet. My books and stationery disappearing wasn't even a news anymore. I felt I had nothing more to lose, and just started talking out loud whatever I saw and felt. You, beware of that. You must avoid this today. You'll end up a disaster if you are not careful with this. And so on. But facing the hate from the entire school and constant bullying, the final loser was I. In the end, I resigned and stopped caring for whatever they should think of me. This is the earliest instant I remember. I was probably about 8 or 9. We lived on the first floor of the flat block, and the location was such that the noises from the outside the building were heard as if they were from the right inside the flat. When I was little, I shared a room with Grandma, and it was one muggy summer night. I was woken up by loud noises. I checked the clock to see it was past 2 a.m. People were chatting and laughing outside. It sounded like at least a group of 7 or 8 individuals, and young like late teenagers. My grandma was deep in a sleep regardless, snoring. I was annoyed but could not possibly shout down all the boys and girls and just hope them to finish soon as it was already late. But their noise only grew louder. Big laughter, swears, clearly goofing around with each other. I decided at least peep out to see who these delinquents were. I got up and probably took 2 to 3 steps towards the window. "Don't look out," a voice of a young woman whispered right behind me, though there were no one else in the room other than Grandma and myself. I froze on the spot. I was so frightened that I could not move or turn around. All the while, the carefree shouts and laughter from the outside carried on. After a long time stuck in the middle of the room, I weighed between moving forward to the window and turning back to bed and potentially see who whispered to me, and decided the first was still less scary. Seeing other fellow people would make me feel less isolated in the situation. So I dared to take steps and looked out of the window. There were nobody. And the moment I realized it, the loud noises were gone too, as if somebody pressed the mute button. I was stuck there once again. The empty and silent outside was scary, but could not look back either in case the young woman was still there. I felt dizzy and legs started to ache, and I could not move. I just hung on to the window frame, hoping this nightmare ended somehow. Until my grandma woke up in the early morning and called my name. This one is from when I was in the last year of high school. My spiritual sensitivity peaked about this time. For most high school students in Korea, it was plain normal to study at school and after-school lessons and come back home late at night, but I tried my best to avoid it. I was too afraid to walk through a quiet night street, full of spirits and ghosts in the dark corners where the street lamp could not reach, or inside the pitch dark of parked cars were heaps of ghosts with hazy pale faces like the face of the moon. But in the last year of high school facing the upcoming SAT, I could not just avoid it anymore. At least by then I have had enough experiences to know that I should just ignore what I saw and act as normally as possible. The moment you give away the sign that you recognize them, they will try to follow or even stick themselves to you. But one night, when I ran straight into this ghost around the corner, I had no time to prepare myself. My eyes straight met the ghost's. And it wasn't just any old ghost either. Normal ghost's face may have pale, vague glow, but this one was glaring with sharp blue light. The worst was that it was smiling, ear to ear. I tell you, among all the ghosts, smiling and dancing ones are the most dangerous ones. They laugh or dance because they are high, and they are high because they are about to harm the other human. Harming the living is their one and only goal and joy left them. I was overwhelmed by its presence, but I had to power through to go back home, so I moved heavy steps looking down the ground. But then my foot caught on something, and I fell on the ground. I was so scared to get up, so stayed on the ground a while until a passerby saw me and helped me up. I could barely say thanks to him and ran all the way back home. Next morning, as I was dressing up for school, I realized it wasn't just a pebble or debris that caught my foot the previous night. On my ankle was dark blue bruise in the shape of a hand. I have seen so many ghosts in my life, but that one was the only one that could attack me physically. From where I used to live, one had to walk through a park to get to the bus stop. One night, I saw a friend off to the stop and was on the way back home through the park. The normally quiet route was full of two presences. One was police. A number of patrol cars and officers were around. The other was a ghost. Nothing like usual ones though. Usually the hazy pale face would be their standout feature. But this one was more like one foot on the side of the street, a hand on the car parked on the side, or an arm on the tree. I had never seen anything quite like it. But it didn't take long till I learned what that was about. On the evening news was a report about the finding of a dismembered body. It made my heart ache having to see the poor victim, even as a ghost, was left all of the places, piece by piece. You may think it's funny, but I don't necessarily advocate the existence of ghosts. Yes, I have seen so many of them, but in one corner of my mind, I also suspect if they aren't just some sort of psychosis. Just because I think I saw it cannot prove that it exists. For that reason, I seldom talk about what I see to others. I don't want them to think I'm crazy or a liar. Even when I see or feel the presence of a ghost in somebody's home, I wouldn't mention it unless it gives off particularly malicious vibe. Who would want to be told that their home is haunted? But once, in my early 20s, I was invited to a close friend's new place. At first glance, the place looked nice, clean and cheap too. But after I used the bathroom, I shoot out, grabbed the friend by the shoulders, and started yelling, "There's a woman in the bathroom, a bob-cut-haired woman, with her head tilted down in an impossible angle. You should move out. How much did you pay for this? She's peeping out on us through her hair now." I had no intention to talk about it, but words just poured out of my control. Fortunately, she was very close to me and already knew about my spiritual gift. She just kept what I told her in her mind and lived on in the same place. Until one day her mom and mom's friend came to visit her. The friend was a professional shaman, and she told my friend, "There's a bob-cut-haired woman in the bathroom. This isn't a good place to live." Hi, it's Anthony here, and thank you very much for your listening. I hope you enjoyed today's stories. Whether you take the claims of possessing a paranormal gift seriously or not, I think these stories clearly demonstrates being different in a way not widely approved of by the society does make the life more challenging. I personally hope for a more tolerant society where being different doesn't mean being wrong. If you enjoyed my video, please give it a like, leave a comment, subscribe to my channel, click the notification bell, and share with your friends. It all helps my still little channel grow. I'll come back next week with something different. Stay safe and take care.